will start. I won't post the agenda right now since we have some new people that have joined us. I believe Taylor is actually out today, but I wanted to go ahead and give David the floor to kind of introduce himself. He is our newest archaeologist. Oh, David, you're muted.
Goodness, what a start. All right. Thanks, everybody. Good morning. My name is Dave Walton. I'm the newest archaeologist with INDOT CRO. And I'm here at the far eastern outpost of INDOT CRO in my home in Richmond, Indiana. And before moving to Indiana, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, up near the lake, and was interested in archaeology up there. Did a archaeological field school at the Johnson's Island officers prison site, Civil War site. In undergrad, went to the College of Worcester for my degree in archaeology, and then got my PhD in archaeology from Boston University, where I went to Mexico and did archaeology focusing on obsidian stone tools and ancient households in Mexico for about, 10, 15 years or so. And now I'm back here in the area where I grew up and doing archaeology across the state of Indiana. It's really fun. I'm really enjoying the position so far. I just started in March. And yeah, if you have anything you want to talk about, always feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, David. Oh man, just every so often, a little bit, a little bit more trickles in. Um, we have some consultant submitted questions to answer at the very end. And then if we have time, if you have any questions throughout, you can absolutely, you can submit them via chat. I'll have an eye on the chat so that if there is any time at the end that we can actually answer a few more questions. Let me go ahead and re-share my screen so you can see the agenda. And so just a quick start with some updates. The first one regarding submitting to CRO for submittals of various documents, things like that. This went out in a listserv, but just a reminder, it will go to esdcro@indot.in.gov, and that is only initial submissions. After that, any revisions, conversations regarding the project, things like that, that's all just going to go to the reviewer. But when you are submitting initial submittals, go ahead and do the esdcro@indot.in.gov. And then I'm actually going to turn it over to David for some changes in archaeological submissions.
Okay, so this part is pretty short and sweet. The main takeaway here is what you need to submit digitally versus what hard copy items are needed by DHPA. So in the MPPA submittal process, the archaeology report is sent to us, the phase 1A. We will then do one of two things. We will either review, and if there are major revisions, we will send the document back to you to kind of go through a round of revision first prior to upload in InScope, where tribes are able to review the report once it's released. So we'll either do that, or we might say to you, hey, we have a couple minor comments to make, minor revisions. Just go ahead and make those revisions and then upload it to InScope. There, we look at it in InScope, we make sure the changes have been made, and then once it's been released in InScope, that is when that gives you the clearance to send the archaeology report over to DHPA for an MPPA, noting that it's just for their records, no official review is required from them. And so the submittal form, the DHPA submittal form, needs to be sent both electronically and in hard copy. The archaeology report itself, the big PDF file, that just gets uploaded to Shard. So there's no longer a requirement to send a printed out hard copy version of the entire report over to DHPA. Just make sure you upload it to Shard and have that report number to include in your submittal form when you send the email with the digital submittal form over to DHPA. And when you're doing that electronic submission, make sure that you copy Matt Kuhn, our CRO director. And it's usually a good idea to CC the archaeology reviewer. That way we can see that that step has been completed.
Thank you so much, David. And then keeping on that same note for submitting to DHPA, just a reminder to ensure that you are also doing your electronic submission to DHPA review at dnr.in.gov and the hard copy after we have approved it to upload to InScope. And then when you do send that over, make sure that you CC whoever your reviewer is, just so that we can see that it's gotten there. That just ensures that reviews being sent over and being reviewed by DHPA are done in a timely manner, and we're all kind of following the process. Like David said, it's pretty short and sweet. And then the other thing is that we are in the process of updating our cultural resources manual. So we're in the process of doing that. If you have any suggestions on content, we know that some of the links are broken. If you have any suggestions on content, please send that to either team lead, so either Matt Kuhn or Susan Brannigan. And then that is the last thing of our updates. Like I said, any questions, just put them in the chat and we will be more than happy to answer them when we have time. And then I will go ahead and turn it over to Clint, who's going to talk about some of our templates.
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone. Clint Kelly, Section 106 Specialist here with INDOT, CRO. One of the things we wanted to remind you about is our template language. That's there for your convenience. It's supposed to be a simple cut and paste operation. So please don't deviate from that. We're finding some situations where some consultants are either combining two different forms, the ECL language with the report distribution language, or they're trying to add their own flair to it. It's just easier just to follow the template language, cut and paste, and make sure that all the language is there, because we're also finding some missing. When you do that, it allows for a quicker review and just makes much simpler. And with that, I think we're going to Kellen.
All right, Kellen Alexander here with INDOT CRO. Obviously, I am the Major Projects and LPA Review Liaison. I'm going to be talking a bit about MPPAs, and so I thought the easiest way to do that would be to look at the form. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly with you guys. Once again, I find the button to do that. There it is. Found it. Can you tell we rehearsed this? Anyway, so this is our new MPPA form. It's a maybe a year or two old at this point. We are working on updating it as well. So if you have any suggestions for the form itself, please let us know. But so getting into some of the things we're seeing, the original submission date is obviously when you guys submit it to us, and all of part 1 should be filled out. We only need to see an amended submission date when we have returned the form to you, and then there have been project updates. And that text should be in red, and then all of the new text should be in red below as well. So any project changes in red text, please. That helps it call out to us that that is new information, and that's what we need to focus on when we do our reevaluation. But again, we only need that red text if we've returned this form to you first. Otherwise, we just need that information. We can incorporate it into the document, and we won't need to see any of the amended submission dates at all. Other than that, pretty much all of this is standard. We all know what we're doing here, some project descriptions. I would say the only other area where we get a little bit of confusion is the right-of-way acquisition portion of the form. And there, if there is going to be right of way, we need to know where that's going to be taken from. Sometimes it doesn't matter, especially in categories where it can't be adjacent to a historic resource. But for projects that can be adjacent to historic resources like B1s or B14s, we need to know if right of way is coming from those resources specifically. So I would say it's, and this is only for above ground portions. David's actually going to talk in a minute about below ground right of way needs. But for above ground purposes, we do need to know where it's coming from and kind of what it consists of existing. Because if it's already in a transportation use, then we don't consider that a right of way take under the 4F law. So that's kind of why we're asking where with this section here is please specify where and how much and what those activities are going to consist of. So, and with that, I am going to kick it over to David for the right-of-way needs.
Awesome. Thank you, Kellen. Yeah, from an archaeology perspective, we need to be aware both of where project activities are taking place, what those project activities are, and how deep they're going down into the ground, because that will obviously has the potential to affect or not affect specific archaeological sites. So that section is very crucial for us, to know that this part of the project is for temporary right of way. Well, what are you doing that for? Oh, it's so that we can have a parking area, a staging area where minimal dumping or any sort of potential disturbance related activity is taking place. We need to know the specifics of those different sections of right of way and what is exactly happening. And a lot of the ways, just to give you kind of perspective, we will try to sort of reverse engineer this, where if we don't see it on the form, we will pull up the construction plans and try to see what's documented there and try to suss that out. All of that research, all of it, looking at those construction plans, teasing that out, putting the construction plans in ArcPro, on the shape files, all of that takes time, to bake into the review time. So if there's any way that you can, on the front end of the submission process, take care of that for us, really explaining what's going on in each section, that really is going to have an exponential effect on the speeding up of review times from an archaeological perspective. So yeah, that's the key there. We do need to know the specifics of each area, what's taking place. Related to that is GIS. What's going on with that? We've had a few submissions recently where instead of shape files, i.e. polygons, defined shapes, we are getting a series of lines just kind of drawn across the map. And for our public facing the interface where the public can see what project areas are and what's going on, we have to have a polygon to be able to move over to that system. And just generally, we need to have polygons instead of lines. So please make sure that you're doing that. And that's it. I think I'm turning it over to Clint.
All right. Hi again. So just also a couple other reminders here. The first being make sure that you're not doing preemptive field work. the section 1 form should be filled out. That doesn't need to be filled out by a QP. We will look at the project and then determine then if field work is needed. The only note here is that this does not apply to LPA projects. So if you notice that field work is needed for an LPA project, please go ahead and do that, and you can submit that with both. Another note is where we're seeing influx of projects where consultants are sending in ECL and MPPA, or calling the MPPA and ECL. The nomenclature matters. So ECL is only for full section 106 projects. MPPA is the MPPA. If you don't know, please get a hold of us. Also, at each stage, the MPPA, if it needs to go full section 106, we'll let you know. Likewise with the ECL, if it fits, we think it fits within the MPPA, we'll let you know. Also, we're noticing kind of a dump on the projects. When we get project description, there's really no filtering out of what's category A and what's category B, and which is resulting in us have to try to filter out what's what. Please consult with the districts to find out what's category A, what's category B. If you don't know, if there's some question, please let us know. But when you're submitting the MPPA, it does not need to have category A, the category A categories listed down there, each one. But we do ask that you let us know what is being processed under category B and category A. Please make that clear so that we're not having to figure out what's what. I think Mary's next.
Hi, everyone. Mary Kennedy, INDOT Historic Bridge Specialist. Just kind of building on what Clint talked about, we don't want to see multiple document types submitted to us at the same time, such as an ECL and an HPR together, because we are, doing this in a process with the ACL comes first and the HPR comes later. Unless you have talked to us, you've talked to CRO, you have made those arrangements, and we know ahead of time that that's what's going to happen. When we do any combined submittals like that, we are doing that in consultation with SHPO to make sure they're okay with doing something different in the 106 process and our normal process. And so we need to talk to them to see if everybody's agreeable to do that first. So don't send these multiple things to us, just send us, what is next in the stage of the project. As Clinton had talked about, ECLs and MPPA at the same time is not something that we want to see either. If we review an ECL and we think it will fall under the MPPA, we'll ask you then to submit the MPPA form. Or if we review the MPPA form and decide that it needs full 106, then we'll ask you to prepare that ECL. But putting both of those things in one submittal just makes it confusing. We're not clear what's going on. You might be doing work you don't need to do. So just have those discussions with us. Going along line with that, if you've had a discussion with us about something, a unique situation with your project, especially when time goes by, so we might advise, hey, this MPPA submittal, it actually doesn't fall under the MPPA. Here's why we think it needs full 106. And maybe you take a month or two before you submit that for the full 106 with the ECL. Put a little note in that email to us in the submittal email that goes in. Hey, per our conversation with this person on this date, we're submitting this for the ECL for full 106 because, jog our memory on that. We get a lot of submissions. We have a heavy queue, especially if time has passed. Just giving that reminder, referencing back to the conversations we had before, providing us that background, that story of what's going on really is helpful for us to get it processed more quickly and get to the right person and the right review started. One last thing we wanted to mention is we've seen some documents be submitted to InScope and then have the wrong reviewer selected on them. That just causes delays and confusion. So especially if you have an archaeology report that you're submitting to InScope, the archaeologist who reviewed it needs to be who you select for InScope as to who's going to get that release email so they can go in. Yep, this is the archaeology report I looked at. It looks fine, and release it. Very rare instances, we might ask some other person to do it if somebody's out of the office, but don't do that unless it's been instructed by us to do that, to change who gets selected for InScope, just to make that process go more smoothly. I think that was the last reminder we had. So I think we're going to transition now. Haley will lead us with some of the Q&A that we have.
Yeah, we have a few questions that consultants submitted ahead of time. And just to preface this, before we start, my husband and I both work from home. So if you hear him selling in the background, I apologize. So the first question we had regarding review times and regarding subsequent reviews, and could those have a shorter review time? As for now, no. We can explore that in the long term. But we are, as you guys all know, we're recently slowly recovering from kind of a mass exodus of a lot of people from CRO. And so we're kind of rebuilding the team back up, and that takes time to catch up and get back to kind of a base. And then we also have new people, so the training requires time. So as for now, no, but it is something we can explore in the long term. For projects that are state-funded emergencies that needed fast turnaround, do you want consultants to submit the CRO submission form for state-funded projects document or email location, shapefiles, et cetera, as has been done? So that kind of depends on where the project is occurring. If it's in a historic district, we do need that form and documentation, just, to keep everything really straightforward. If it's not in a district, email is generally fine. And this is kind of a case-by-case basis. So kind of just make your best judgments when these situations are occurring. The third question regards scope changes and amendments. And just a reminder, if the MPPA has already been sent back to you, then that's an amendment. If it hasn't been sent back to you, if we haven't said, hey, this applies under the MPPA, under the following categories, et cetera, that is a scope change. So that would be a new submission, or emailing us the MPPA form with the new information and maybe putting that in an email. However, so if we have sent it back to you and there has been a scope change, all scope changes need to be sent with an amendment, because even if it's a reduction in scope, the example that the person that sent this supplied was they removed adding a paved shoulder. That can remove conditions from the MPPA. So instead of it, falling under categories B3 and B9, now it's just B9. So we want to make sure that we are applying those conditions correctly. So if there is a scope change and there needs to be an amendment made, we do need that so that we can review and authorize it and ensure that it's still applicable and those correct conditions are applied. The next question is, given the review times, how does CRO advise proceeding early on a project when we can't get all the information on the project? Do we submit the information we have at the time and go through potentially multiple rounds of reviews or questions? Or do we wait until we have most or all of the information and have to request expedited reviews? So our best advice is use the project schedule as your guide. If time allows for additional information to come through, wait a little bit and make sure, because we be in communication with your prime and then submit that information when it's deemed complete enough for a determination under the MPPA, and you have what you would perceive as the maximum scope, because I think, as Clint has said, we want the worst case scenario. We want, all those curb ramps. We want all those small structures. We want to know that you have the most, because if it shrinks, that's fine. But if it grows, then that can create some issues. So we want the worst case scenario and in terms of potential work and potential right-of-way, because we don't want to count on expedited review as a means to kind of make up for time. We'd rather, you know, be able to shrink that scope down a little bit rather than try and figure out, because you don't want to get too far and then the scope's grown and then all of a sudden we're like, hey, this actually doesn't apply under the MPPA anymore. So we want to know the worst case scenario that's going to help all of us. And then how does CRO recommend addressing features below the pavement, such as interurban rails, cisterns? And does it matter if the features below the pavement are within a historic district or not, with the assumption that these resources may potentially be eligible? This consultant has received requests for USPs, for feature documentation, and for QP to be on site during construction. Should all known or possible features below the pavement be noted in the MPPA submission or HPR and addressed on an individual project basis? So if it is in a historic district, it should be noted. Some of these do need to be determined on a project by project basis because sometimes the project is its own beast. And since below ground really isn't my specialty, I'm actually going to turn it over to Matt to speak a little bit more on this.
Thanks, Haley. So in terms of archaeological evaluation of these types of resources, it's partly an it depends. And one way to think about it would be if we didn't know in advance that they were there and we encountered them, we would need to treat them as post-review discoveries or accidental discoveries under state law. So when we know that they're there in advance, we can account for them in some way, often in consultation with SHPO. For instance, fire cisterns, we've really developed a set of criteria for what kind of documentation needs to be done. So when we know they're there in advance, we can build that in, and that really just consists of taking a set of some specific photographs and some specific measurements. Similarly for interurban rails, when we know they're there beforehand, sometimes we have documentation that they've been removed. Sometimes we don't know. And so in those cases, when we don't have documentation, those are some of the instances when, or alternatively, when we know that they have not been removed. Those are times when we've had those USPs there to allow that when those resources are exposed during construction, that they can be documented and evaluated by a qualified professional archaeologist. So that's really the way that we would look at this. You know, these are things that would need to be evaluated if they came up as surprises during construction. So just knowing them, being aware that they're present prior to construction, you know, that doesn't obviate our responsibilities under state or federal law to do some sort of documentation, and especially under state law to record them as archaeological sites. So I hope that clarifies and kind of answers that question, but this is something that, you know, if you have follow-up questions about that, we might be able to get back to them before we finish today. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Our next question involves those lovely little CLVs. Can CRO explain why a roadway project that involves small structures, culverts, medians, drains, drive pipes, etc., needs to have photographic documentation of all the pipes for an MPPA submittal? And that is because part of the condition to apply culverts to the MPPA states that the structure exhibits no wood, brick, or stone, or at least non-modern wood, brick, or stone to still apply under the MPPA. So we need photographic documentation so that we can see that. And those smaller structures, some of them are not in bias, so we can't use those databases to confirm that. So we do need those photographs in order to ensure that it does apply under the MPPA. Would it be possible for CRO to respond to project submittals with more accurate project review times? So we are giving you our best estimate of project review times. Like I said earlier, we have only recently filled our last vacant historian position, and we are still our archaeology team lead position is still vacant. So we are doing our best to ensure that those review times are as accurate as possible. If there are some delays, it is related to that. And then our last question that was submitted ahead of time, it appears that there's been an uptick in the identification of resources that may potentially be eligible on MPPA Category B projects. Could CRO provide guidance on what is expected for surveying/investigating and evaluating non-IHSSI resources? So when we are reviewing MPPAs that are submitted, we tend to err on the side of caution in terms of eligibility. We are cautious to ensure that we don't lose our ability to run projects under the MPPA. There is a risk assessment being done. Any party of the MPPA could terminate it if by written notice, and if there is no ability to avoid that termination, we would have to conduct individual project reviews under 106. So we want to make sure that, we are, as always, we're doing our due diligence, but that is just another reason to ensure that we're doing our due diligence. Is the MPPA is very helpful when we're doing projects, and we want to protect that, and we want to make sure that we are doing the most. And I think Kellen had a little bit more to add to this as our LPA project, like LPA head, to kind of talk a little bit more about sometimes when this field work is done ahead of time. Kellen, did you want to add anything?
I can, yeah. So just because you guys as consultants and QPs don't identify something that's eligible in your fieldwork doesn't mean that we won't go back and have questions, because we are only seeing things through pictures, and sometimes those aren't always clear, or the street view is not available, especially with LPAs. So it's not a judgment on what you've determined. We're really asking you what your thought process was there. And like Haley said, we are going to err on the side of caution. So because we're not there in person, and because we don't get a lot of explanation, sometimes our part 2 form is pretty to the point and doesn't give you a lot of space to provide your reasoning. We might go ahead and ask for commitments or for additional photographs or descriptions of other properties that we happen to see through our desktop reviews. So definitely not a commentary on anybody's ability or anything like that. We're just trying to make sure that we're protecting the MPPA, because we have seen that uptick in properties that are determined eligible, especially mid-century properties. And so we want to continue to use the MPPA. So erring on the side of caution.
Thank you, Kellen. So that is all we have in terms of questions that were submitted ahead of time. If you have any further questions, you're more than welcome to raise your hand, just so we don't have people talking over each other. You could submit questions via chat. Yes, Bridget, go for it.
Hi, so regarding you guys saying on the MPPA form you want Cat B and Cat A stuff separated out in the project description as to what work applies to which category. So does that mean for, say, an HMA overlay that's going to have culvert stuff, that you want the Cat A categories on there as well for like the HMA overlay, and then the Cat B stuff that applies to, say, the culverts, you want that all spelled out, and you're going to make approve the Cat A determination that we have made, as well as the Cat B determination?
So I think I'm going to leave this one to Clint, since he was the one to kind of explain this. Clint, do you want to add to what you were saying?
So, yes, we want to know what's Cap A and Cap B. So certain things like the HMA overlay is pretty obvious, but what we're finding is we're essentially getting submitted a very long list of culverts that frankly mostly are category A that we have to go and look at. So what we're asking is to make that determination prior to the MPPA and letting us know which which culverts would be you're wanting process under B and which ones are A. Because remember, we do not have to approve category A. We don't have to review category A. So it just helps us narrow down our review. It'll help, I think, cut down on review times when we know exactly which ones are category A and which ones are category B. And I would point out that I think sometimes there's confusion that if one structure has right of way or something or is in undisturbed soil, that each one has to be reviewed under category B, which is, from my understanding, is not true. So just letting us know which ones apply under B and which one under A help us greatly. Does that make sense?
It does, but to follow up, so you don't want going back to that example with the culverts and an HMA, you don't want all the category A work listed. And saying this is category A and this is B. You just want to know if the culverts you're looking at are within A or B.
Right. And I mean, I think that
Okay.
in terms of the project, I think a full project description, including A and B, is appropriate because it is part of the project. But what I think we're asking is either in the project description on the MPPA or a separate appendice, or even maybe even in the email, but something that tells us that you've already looked at certain aspects of the project scope and determined that they're category A, and that whatever amount is what you're wanting us to look at under category B.
Okay, but any project with culverts that has right of way, you still want to look at, correct?
Correct, but
Okay.
there again, if the project, let's say you have a well, I guess it's like if it's taking right away, more than likely it's going to be in undisturbed soil. But if it would apply under category A, but you're just wanting us to look at it for the right of way, I think it's perfectly acceptable to just let us know that the scope is A, but we need to look at it for the right of way, because we would look at it a little bit different if it's right of way versus a B9.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. And if there's any other questions after this, when you're looking at it, trying to figure out what you want, what we want, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clint. I am just going to answer this question really quick from Brock in the chat, and then I will have Jeff ask his question. Brock asked, why are category A types not required by the MPPA? Shouldn't the MPPA cover all 106 aspects? So the programmatic agreement does cover all 106 aspects. Category A does not require review by CRO. And that is because, as it says in the programmatic agreement, these projects by their nature don't have an effect on properties listed and are eligible for the National Register. So this is why that disturbed soils question is so important, because if it falls under category A, it has to be in previously disturbed soils. And these are things like in-kind replacement of signage, in-kind replacement of lighting, things like that. And so that's why those fall under category A. So they are included in the programmatic agreement. They just don't require review by CRO. And then Jeff, you had a question?
Hey, Haley, can I jump in just real quick on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, hey, I apologize, I wasn't clear. When I said MPPA, I meant the MPPA determination form that we submit. So why we aren't including category A on those, because how I'm looking at it is from the NEPA aspect, and you know, it's a little bit awkward to have a MPPA determination that clears it for 106, but then having to go back into the NEPA document and provide additional clearances for things that are category A. And so essentially how, as a NEPA reviewer, when we are clearing the CE, we essentially look at it and say, okay, if 106 gave this clearance under the MPPA determination form, we essentially consider that to be completely cleared, and we you know, we're trying not to get too involved with the 106 side of things and have to clear all the category A's in addition to whatever was cleared on your end. So I guess I'm wondering why we aren't clearing everything in that one form, given that that's all 106 clearance.
Could I jump in here, Haley?
Absolutely.
So, as in terms of the MPPA and why we're not wanting to do category A and category B, simply is we're not approving the project under category A. We don't have to. It's not. Those determinations can be made at the district level, and again, we're not approving that because we're not looking at it. So it really makes sense to just have the category B.
So really the MPPA determination form, I mean, could be literally looked at as a category B determination form.
Correct.
This is Kellen. I'm also going to jump in here, and I would say that additionally, a lot of category A work is covered by category B. So if we don't include the category A part of it, it's because we've already done a more extensive review under category B.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brock. And then Jeff, you had a question?
I did. Hi, everyone. This couple questions just about the archaeological short report. We had a couple comments. One where we've had to take photographs of diagnostic artifacts, specifically flakes. Is that a new requirement if it's for photographs of non-diagnostic artifacts?
Hey, Jeff, this is Matt.
Hey.
So,
Hey, Matt.
I think the one you're talking about may have been a survey where the one artifact that was recovered was a flake. And
Correct.
so, you know, it's helpful to have representative photos of artifacts sometimes, even if they're not diagnostic. And I think if the survey recovers, you know, a singular artifact, it would be preferable to illustrate that.
Okay.
And, you know, it's not like we need, so no, we're not going to require photographs of every single flake, particularly if you find a, you know, a large lithic scatter or campsite or something. But just to reduce kind of the air of mysteriousness, you know, if you found just
Got
like
it.
one or two artifacts, I think that we would, provided that they're not, you know, coal or unidentifiable rest, you know.
Okay, just use common sense. Obviously. Okay.
Yeah, common sense, but
Okay.
but err on the side of some kind of documentation if you do find, you know, legit artifacts and not not
Not cool.
not
Yeah.
cinders or coal or chunks of concrete.
Okay. All right. Cool. Then my other question is on the records check, the radius. So I know that for the short reports we can use a half a mile, but then if we end up finding a site, then we need to expand that to a mile. So you're basically doing 2 records checks. Because if we're going out assuming, you know, we're going to do a half a mile, then we find an artifact, then we need to do a second records check. Is that policy, or is that something that DHPA is requiring as well?
Okay, so I I think I might know the situation you're talking about there. And if so, that wasn't really predicated on the site. So we haven't had really specific guidance from DHPA about when to use what records check radius. And in general, that's kind of a play it by ear kind of thing, but it should be situationally appropriate. And so I think the case you were talking about, on review, there were no sites within a half mile, but then within a 1 mile radius, there were a number of sites. And I think given that you had identified a new site there.
Yeah, correct.
It seemed warranted to include that larger radius.
I
But
totally
I mean, a
agree.
more general rule of thumb might be if you
Start off
feel
with
like
the
you're in
mile,
a
yeah.
survey setting that has a decent potential to identify sites and you don't see anything within the half mile radius, you might want to consider, if there are sites, you might want to consider expanding that in order to capture whatever the most nearby recorded sites are, so that there is still some kind of context. And if you do identify sites.
Yep, that makes total sense. I just want to make sure that there's no hard and fast rule on that. And
no, there's
it's
really
just
not.
situationally appropriate. So that totally
Kind of
makes
situationally appropriate. And I think to be safe, if you know there are sites within a mile but not within a half mile, it might be appropriate to do the 1 mile radius just to capture that.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Matt and Jeff. And then let me reopen the chat here. It looks like Kellen handled a question from Lisa about tables for multiple structures and then labeling those categories. Yes, we love tables. They make everything so much easier when we're doing reviews. And then Sharon asked a question about MPPA Category B addresses features including but not limited to historic brick or stone sidewalks, curbs or curb ramps, stepped or elevated sidewalks, and historic brick or stone retaining walls. When a brick street is known to be located beneath existing asphalt, is it likely that would be considered an unusual or historic feature? I actually have not encountered this. I was going to see if any of my colleagues in CRO, what your advice on that would be.
Yeah, Haley, I can take this.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So yeah, Kellen here again. I have some weird feedback going on, so I apologize if I sound funny. But brick streets underneath pavement do not contribute to historic districts. If there's an existing brick street that is visible, there's no pavement on top, that could be a contributing features of the district. But if it's below pavement, we do not consider it to be a feature.
Kellen, Karen asks, what about limestone curbs along sidewalks when not in a district?
That depends on if there's an adjacent resource, individual resource. Generally, we'd say it's probably not a feature, provided that there isn't an individual resource adjacent to it as well.
Thank you, Kellen. I don't see any more hands raised and I don't see anything in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions or anything like that?
Hi, Haley, it's Dave. I don't really have a question to pose to the group, more just sort of upon reflection in all of our coverage today, I'm thinking about scenarios where a project is submitted and claimed to be in previously disturbed soils, but then as archaeologists, we review it and go, ooh, actually, it looks like there are some areas of undisturbed soils. You're going to need to do a phase 1A survey. Those projects seem to overwhelmingly be small structure replacements, so culvert replacements. So I would just caution everybody to really take a look at the specific, lines of right of way and construction activity, what's going on, where's the project area. And even if the project area creeps into an agricultural field, just several feet, that really could be undisturbed soil, is probably likely undisturbed, and it needs to be investigated archaeologically. So in terms of your project timelines with those small structures, really take a hard look at that. And if time is really a important variable with this project, then do a small archaeological survey, of that project area to try to head off any concerns we might have about whether it's disturbed or undisturbed. I can think of a recent example where I reviewed a project like this, and sure enough, right even within the main construction area, there were three or four probes, 4 or 5 probes dug, and I think all but one were completely undisturbed natural soil profiles. And so it's can be very difficult to tell sometimes with these small structures what has been disturbed and what hasn't, in the past. So keep an eye out for those. Maybe do a phase 1A survey just to be safe.
Yeah, thanks, David. I'd follow up on that by saying for those, we'd really like to see not just the construction limits, but the right-of-way covered in those instances. So if you're going out into agricultural fields, you can assume it's likely to be undisturbed. And something that can be an issue, even with those small structure replacements, is utility relocates. Because if there are utilities within the existing right-of-way, if they need to relocate out to the edge of that new right-of-way, we want, that's part of the Section 106 undertaking. It would not happen but for this project. And so we'd really like to have that covered in advance to accommodate that, and not find ourselves in the situation where either it's happening without Section 106 clearance, or because it's so late in the process, we need to revisit things and perhaps have a phase 1A survey done after the conclusion of Section 106. And one other case where we often ask for phase 1A surveys is sidewalk projects. If new sidewalks are being put in where none currently exist in residential areas, we don't assume those residential lawns to be previously disturbed. They might be visibly previously disturbed. They might be steeply graded, and so we can evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. But in general, don't assume that residential areas are previously disturbed. So if there's going to be new ground disturbance, any place where there's a likelihood or potential for undisturbed soils to be present, we do need a phase 1A survey in order to evaluate the applicability of the MPPA to that project. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. And just to add to that really quickly, we have a question from Brooke, and then I will absolutely address Hannah and Lisa's questions. Brooke wants to know, do areas that have underground utilities count as disturbed soil?
Yes, in general, if the utilities are, storm sewer lines, that's usually a pretty significant disturbance. If the area is really crisscrossed with buried utilities, including pipes, then yes. But if it's an otherwise undisturbed area and there is just something like a buried cable going through it, it's really going to depend on the width of it. If you're looking at something that is like, 10 or 15 meters of apparently undisturbed soil, and we know that there's like a buried electric line or something in it, that's a very small area of disturbance. And depending on where it's located, it could likely leave a testable area. So that's going to depend on sort of a case-by-case basis. But often, yes, underground utilities do result in what we would consider to be previously disturbed soils.
I would also pay attention to utilities that are paralleling the road versus utilities that are going straight to residences. or structures, because I've had some consultants recently, claim that water lines going directly, from the street directly towards a house, that then means the entire 50-foot stretch, across the span from the roadway, approaching the house is disturbed. When, to Matt's point, just the area excavated for that water line going to the house is actually disturbed. So yeah, it's more reliable to call entire areas with utilities disturbed when they're running across the whole side of the road.
Thank you, David. So we have a question from Hannah regarding the review times. Is something that consultants struggle with is the timing of projects and recognizing the value of providing plans and exact project details, but they're not usually ready by the time they need to get their MPPA form in the queue, and longer review times mean that projects need to be submitted early to account for that. And is it our best practice to submit early and provide an update later to avoid an expedited review? Yeah, I would say yes. If you feel like you have enough information to submit, by all means, and like we said, give us the worst case scenario. And then if you need to alter it later, I mean, that's understandable. We understand that you guys are also on time crunches, timelines, so that's totally fine. And then Lisa asked about estimated review times or point to where to find them. So we do have our listserv available on the CRO's portion of INDOT's webpage. And then in January of this year, Matt sent out that the estimate is 30 calendar days, not 30 calendar days, so sorry, 30 business days. However, he did have the caveat in that if we receive 15 new submissions in a single day, some of them are not going to necessarily, some of them are going to possibly be assigned for more than 30 days in order for us to have a practicable and balanced workload. I am going to drop a link in the chat just to our webpage really quick, just in case if anybody's new or doesn't know. And this has a link to our listserv for the most updated version of it. And then any other, I think that's everything in the chat. Does anybody else have any further questions? If you think of something after we all leave this virtual space, you're more than welcome to just shoot us an email. Kellen?
Yeah, I know we mentioned it before, but if you guys have any suggested updates or clarifications that we could do to the CRM, to our templates, to the MPPA form, please let us know. We are working on those, and we're trying to do some updates more frequently. So yeah, if you guys are the ones working with these documents the most, so if you have any suggestions, please let us know. Again, send those suggestions to the team leads.
Well, if that is everything, thank you all so much for joining us. Hopefully this has been as productive for you guys as it has been for us. We wanted to at least get one of these virtual chats going again, just so everybody can get some updates, hopefully put some faces to some names, things like that. Oh, and we have one more. Do you want photos that accompany the MPPA to be sent as separate document in a submittal email? So that is kind of dealer's choice. I know we have some consultants that submit like a PDF with like all of the maps, all of the photos. It is so when you're sending the links for ProjectWise, just making sure that that goes into that folder. You can have that PDF. You can have it be a separate map, a separate PDF for pictures, things like that. It would be sent as a separate document that accompanies the MPPA in the submittal, but it would still be linked to ProjectWise, if that makes sense.
Ah, there you go. He's a good guy. Oh, really?
Okay, there we go. Okay, awesome. I'm happy that was helpful, Bryn. Well, if anybody doesn't have anything else, like I said, I really appreciate any further questions. You are more than welcome to email us. We really, really appreciate you joining us for this. It means a lot. And it looks like I'll say that really stereotypical thing where I say, I'm going to give you 30 minutes back in your day. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.